to meeting number 21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Pursuant to the orders of reference of April 11 and May 26, 2020, the committee is resuming its study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. I would like to remind everyone to please use the language channel of the language they are speaking. So if you intend to switch between Canada's official languages, please be sure to switch the channel first so it corresponds with the language you are speaking. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for today. We have Robert Falconer, a research associate from the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, as well as Syed Hassan, Executive Director at Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Mr. Falconer, please proceed with your 7.5-minute opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. Dear honorable members of the committee, I want to begin by opening a statement by thanking the committee for the opportunity to present on this very important topic on the involvement of temporary foreign workers in the agricultural sector in the COVID-19 pandemic. This topic is one which I've investigated as a researcher in immigration and refugee policy, and with which I've also had personal experience. My own father was a refugee from Chile, giving me the opportunity to improve and maintain my own fluency in Spanish, which led to summer jobs during my undergraduate career working in the Orders of BC with temporary foreign workers from Mexico. Previous to my work with the School of Public Policy, I was also a client support worker in the Temporary Foreign Worker Program at the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, located in Calgary, Alberta. In that capacity, I made several trips to the Cargill meatpacking plant in High River, Alberta to meet with workers and provide them resources in relation to their immigration status and employment. It is with that context I hope to provide the members of the committee with an overview of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program in relation to Canadian agriculture that combines both data on the topic as well as personal experience. In addressing this committee, it is important to acknowledge the long history of agricultural-related immigration to Canada since Confederation in 1867. For roughly the first 100 years of our almost 153-year history as a country, one of the primary focuses of our immigration system was to secure and expand our agricultural productivity. The Immigration Act of 1869 established the basic framework of Canadian immigration policy in relation to labor at the beginning of Confederacy, with several provisions that may resonate with the committee members today. First, it was designed to attract immigrants that would contribute to Canadian economic productivity, especially in agriculture. Second, it sought to ensure, quote, the safety and protection of immigrants en route and upon arrival in Canada, unquote. It sought to regulate abuses commonly perpetuated against new arrivals. Finally, it provided for government agents to assist immigrants in arranging lodging and making connections in their chosen destinations. Following the Dominion Lands Act of 1872, Canada began to rapidly expand its immigration program to recruit millions of farmers and farm laborers from overseas, leading to a massive 1,000% increase in the population of the prairies and the founding of Alberta and Saskatchewan as provinces. This period came to be known as the wheat boom, a time in which Canada was the world's fastest growing economy. Many Canadians with Ukrainian, Polish, or other Eastern European ancestry can trace their roots to that period in which their grandparents and great-grandparents arrived to farm in Canada. I will not detail you with every act or decision in relation to Canadian agricultural immigration, but for the purposes of this statement, I wish to reiterate that from the foundation of Canada until the signing of the first seasonal agricultural worker agreement in 1966, Canada made a concerted effort to expand, secure, and protect its agricultural system through the recruitment and settlement of farmers and laborers on farms. Shifting to today, the COVID-19 pandemic has raised questions with regards to the safety of workers, the security of our food supply chain, and the appropriateness of the temporary foreign worker program when Canadians themselves are experiencing record high levels of unemployment. In a forthcoming paper by the School of Public Policy, we find that the number of arriving workers in agriculture, food processing, and transportation is 14% below the number that arrived last year, equal to a shortfall of approximately 3,800 workers during the onset of the primary agricultural season, including planting, calving, and the Atlantic lobster season. This shortfall, combined with a 14-day quarantine period, represents a significant loss in time as well as workers, especially in consideration of purchases of seed, livestock, and other equipment built around expectations for expanded production and the necessary increase in workers to support it. It also has a human impact, which I'll discuss further on. This loss may be most acutely felt in the primary work on farms, with a 14% reduction in relation to 2019, in meat and poultry plants with a drop-off of 20%, and in seafood packing plants with a loss of 60% of other foreign workers in relation to the previous year. Calls to employ more Canadians in relation to the drop in arriving foreign workers may be understood in the current circumstances. I would caution, however, that this presents several difficulties. First, producers and employers will need time and resources in training new employees during the onset of the full agricultural season. Second, Canadians may not actually respond to increased hiring incentives or initiatives by local farmers and producers in sufficient numbers to fill the labor gap. Data from Statistics Canada shows that, adjusting for inflation, farmers actually have been willing to spend more on wages for employees. Work by the Conference Board of Canada, however, suggests that we may need to raise wages by upwards of 66% in order to completely offset an ongoing trend of declining domestic participation in agriculture. Our own exploratory research in the matter, which I should emphasize is preliminary, early, and subject to a more robust analysis, suggests that Canadians may not be as responsive to wage increases in the agricultural sector as foreign workers. Therefore, increased hiring may offset the decline in domestic workers, but not actually fill the gap. In the conclusion of my remarks, I wish to put a face to these numbers. Discussions of labor supply and productivity need to be contextualized in the humans they represent. Yesterday, it was reported in CBC News that a third worker has died from coronavirus, located on a farm near Simcoe, Ontario. They join Bonifacio e Eugenio Romero and Rogelio Munoz Santos, both Mexican workers who died from the virus while working on Canadian farms. In considering reforms to the temporary foreign worker program, we must keep in mind that improving the condition of workers on farms and in processing plants is not a zero-sum game, where Canadians must lose if workers are to benefit. In fact, both sides can win in this case. To that end, the committee may wish to explore some of the following ideas in relation to foreign workers in agriculture. First, reconsider the access TFWs have to employment insurance, especially in periods of pandemic and job loss, which may encourage them to take time off rather than risking the spread of disease. 2, consider adapting the Atlantic immigration pilot to an agricultural immigration pilot and provide workers with the ability to gain permanent residency through the accumulation of hours or with the support of an employer. Upwards of 45% of TFWs return up to farms after 3 years, 39% over 5 years, and after 10 years, still a quarter remain. This shows that despite being called the temporary foreign worker program, many of them have come up repeatedly year after year. 2, consider allowing farmers to immediately deduct their capital costs for constructing new housing for TFWs, including sufficient space for workers, and make ongoing inspections part of the work of both the IRCC as well as the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. In fact, we may provide greater security to our food supply chain by addressing working conditions. We may also consider a retrospective rather than innovative look when we consider the permanency of foreign workers in agriculture. This means looking back on our history as a country, which was built on a robust agricultural immigration program. And it's perhaps time we revisit that history with renewed understanding of the risks to our food supply chain and to workers themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Faulkner. Mr. Hussain, please go ahead with your opening remarks.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today on behalf of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, a coalition of 27 migrant-led organizations and allies. I'm also on the coordinating committee of the Migrant Rights Network, Canada's largest national migrant justice alliance. The truth is that a person's ability to access healthcare, assert their rights at work, be with their families, or protect themselves in a pandemic is directly linked to their citizenship. This is true because the law makes it so. Just as one example, migrant agricultural workers know that a single COVID-19 infection on a farm puts them all in immediate danger, but they cannot risk speaking out because doing so means termination, homelessness, loss of income, and deportation. On Saturday night, Juan Lopez Chaparro passed away. He's the third Mexican migrant worker to die in Ontario from COVID-19, following Bonifacio Romero and Rogelio Santos Munoz. Their pictures are right here. There are at least 1.6 million temporary or undocumented migrants in Canada, or 1 in every 23 people. Canada has failed to provide equal rights and support during COVID-19 to at least 1 in every 23 people. This includes over 500,000 people in the country with no immigration status, most of whom do not have access to COVID-19 emergency measures or even healthcare. Undocumented migrant women are forced to move in with abusive men. Families chose unassisted home birth over years of indebtedness to medical bills, and thousands have become homeless. Those that did not lose work, face dangerous conditions, but without any essential worker wage top-up. Hundreds, if not thousands of migrant domestic workers are trapped by the employers who refuse to let them leave their homes, even to buy groceries or send remittances home. These migrant care workers are forced to stay in these conditions to complete hours of work requirements towards permanent residency status. In addition, they must fulfill impossible language and educational assessments to have a chance to reunite with their families. Over 850,000 people on study and postgraduate permits are unable to find work, have lost wages, and are struggling. Many are only eating because of food banks. But post-secondary institutions have raised tuition fees, and existing immigration requirements means that most will not qualify for permanent resident status. Tens of thousands of migrant farm workers in Canada came here and are choosing to stay despite fears of getting sick because they cannot access income supports. We released this report with complaints on behalf of over 1,000 migrant workers about increased racism, surveillance, wage theft, exploitation, labor intensification, and inhumane housing. A multi-tier system of immigration where some have permanent residency and therefore rights to healthcare, family unity, and freedom from reprisals, while others are temporary or without status, engenders exploitation. That inequality and exploitation has been exacerbated during COVID-19. This isn't just migrants saying it. Consider an op-ed published on May 5, 2014 in the Toronto Star that said, "This is a basic issue of fairness. Canada needs to recommit itself to bringing permanent immigrants here who have a path to citizenship." Authored by then MP, now Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Or recommendation 16 from this committee's report in September 2016 that called on Canada to review the current path to permanent residency for all temporary foreign workers with a view to facilitating access to permanent residency for migrant workers. Or recommendation 19 from, again, this committee study in December 2012 under the previous Conservative government, which recommended that Canada, quote, offer better opportunities for temporary foreign workers to eventually become permanent immigrants. The reason that permanent immigration has always been a central component of any review on vulnerability and exploitation of non-permanent residents is simple. As Minister Carla Qualtrough said just 3 days ago, there's a power imbalance that exists in this system. The power imbalance exists wherever there is temporary migration or people are undocumented. By denying them the rights that come with citizenship, laws and lawmakers are tipping the scale in favor of abuse, exploitation, exclusion, and death. We're going to provide this committee with detailed recommendations, but the solution is very simple. Ensure full immigration status for all migrants immediately, without exclusion, without exemption, and ensure everyone arrives with full immigration status in the future. This is a matter of life and death. A few final words. First, a path to citizenship or permanent residency is not the solution. A pathway, like the recently launched Agri-Food Immigration Pilot, is a promise of future security for some workers if they can jump through impossible hoops, leaving them more at the mercy of employers. Second, increased inspections, while also necessary, will not solve the problem. Inspections ensure that employers are not breaking the law, but most of what employers are doing is legal. The law does not mandate social distancing, does not create a national housing standard, and is not a mechanism through which workers can complain. Third, this is not just about good enough to work, good enough to stay, or guardian angels. Yes, migrants are in jobs that have been essential during a public health pandemic, but whether migrants are disabled, homeless, or unable to work, they must have the ability to take care of themselves and their families. Whether it is migrant sex workers or migrants working in warehouses, in construction, or delivering food, every person is essential. No one deserves to be exploited. Everyone deserves to live. We need a single-tier system of immigration, and that means full immigration status for all in the country and full immigration status for everyone that arrives in the future. This is essential. It's necessary. It must happen now. People are dying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Now we're going to proceed with questions, beginning with Ms. Cusey, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Faulkner, I really appreciate your testimony here today. My interest in inviting you to this committee was earlier during the pandemic, specific to an article that you had in one of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute publications on accreditation of physicians, and how you were concerned that I believe the title of the article had brain waste within it, but it seemed the crux of your article was the concern that the current government was not providing enough oversight or provisions in the pandemic environment to allow those with much needed medical designations and skills and experience from other nations to achieve accreditation and to be used completely and effectively for the pandemic response. So I was hoping you might be able to share your findings from that article, as well as some of the information in that article with the group here as we reflect upon the lessons of COVID-19 and preparation for future similar scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you to the honorable member. Yes, I can absolutely touch on that as well. What we found in preparing the research with regards to, this was specific to immigrant physicians working in Canada, it can be generalized among many other healthcare workers, including nurses, lab technologists, and other frontline workers and workers involved in testing, is that it is taking an exorbitantly long time in which for a newcomer to actually recertify within Canada. And I should clarify that when I also say newcomer, might sound odd, but maybe the more appropriate term I should be using is international medical graduate, which would include those who may be Canadian citizens or permanent residents, but who studied a medical degree. What we found is that that this is taking upwards of 5, sometimes 10 years in order for a newcomer to recertify, or an international medical graduate to recertify within Canada. It is also costing a considerable amount, upwards of 42% of an IMG's or newcomer's median income during this period. This is not just involved, this doesn't just involve the costs of recertification itself, which includes things like fees, submitting licensing requirements, but this also includes the foregone opportunity costs, the foregone benefits in terms of income they could be earning during that time, of the cost of buying textbooks in order to recertify, of transportation associated with traveling to various interviews, etc. For some, especially more vulnerable parts of the population as well, this might mean that it's simply impossible for them to be able to practice in Canada. A real life example I will use is I was speaking with an immigration lawyer who recently helped a refugee gain protected person status in Canada. They were very well regarded heart surgeon in their home country of Colombia, were fluent in both official languages, English and French. But because of the manner in which they came to Canada, they came without a lot of their assets, a lot of their income, and were driving Uber, meaning that they are very unlikely, even with the knowledge that they have, to be able to recertify due to the financial barriers. Some of this is due, there's a limitation on the residency seats available for IMGs. These are the, again, international medical graduates at the provincial level. But it's not exclusively that as well. Immigrants oftentimes arrive in Canada with unfounded expectations that because they qualified under the federal immigration streams, that might qualify them to work, and are sadly disappointed when they're unable to help. I noticed that recently Quebec, the province of Quebec has decided they want to increase the number of what they call essential workers coming to Quebec, but I noted that many of these would need access to a license in order to practice, meaning that even if they arrived next month, it's likely that they would not be able to actually help out in the COVID-19 pandemic until much further down the road. To finalize the final part of your question, I know there's also plenty of off-favorite questions as well as the other panelists here as well. These provide valuable insight here. One thing I'll finish off is that really this pandemic globally is helping us reconsider what barriers to entry are actually necessary. I can understand that concerns around public health and safety with regards to licensure of newcomers, but we have examples from Ireland, France, the UK, New York, New Jersey, several other states in the US have decided to do things ranging from everything to allow immigrants to practice under an associate model, meaning they practice under the supervision of a fully licensed medical professional, to, in the case of New York, completely waiving the requirement to actually have a license in order to practice. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that, but I do think that this opportunity here is this pandemic here is an opportunity to reassess how exactly do we license newcomers and how can we work with both the provinces and the federal government to ensure that part of their immigration stream involves a licensing stream as well.
No, that's excellent. I think it's you've provided a lot of policy suggestions as well as best practices and places to look for those best practices. Then also based upon that testimony as well as your previous testimony, as we go forward after the pandemic, the labor force will need to be, I think, completely reevaluated and maybe even redefined. Can you provide any suggestions that you might have for legislators as we go forward into this new labor environment?
Very briefly, if you could, Mr. Faulkner, we're out of time. Go ahead.
Yeah, very briefly, I would consider going to the example of Mr. Husan, reconsider the role of, especially of temporary foreign workers and their place as permanent residents or potential place as permanent residents within Canada. We are worried about our food security. That'd be the big one. And finally, again, it's one thing to bring a newcomer here to Canada or for them to arrive, and another for them to be able to practice in their profession, especially on the front lines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cusey. Mr. Housefather, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both witnesses. And Mr. Faulkner, I agree very much. As a mayor and now as an MP, I've been working to try to get Quebec to change the requirements with respect to foreign medical personnel, international graduates, but unfortunately, most of this is really provincial, and and College of Physicians. But offline, I'd be interested in chatting about that at a future date. I wanted to ask both of you guys about language requirements. One of the things in the last Parliament that I worked on as chairman of the Justice Committee was a study on human trafficking, and what we recommended was that temporary foreign workers needed to receive documentation, including health documentation, in their own language, not only in English and French. And given the fact that many documents are still not available in Spanish, for example, with respect to many of the workers that are now on our farms, or in Tagalog or in other languages, I think there may be a breakdown in communication where temporary foreign workers do not know all of the rights that they have and are then not able to exercise their rights. And I'm just wondering if either of you had any recommendations in regard to languages, perhaps.
I think the simple notion is that migrants know that their housing, their working conditions, the way they're being treated is unjust and unfair. People know when their rights are being broken. This is not about information. It's about power. If you speak up and you'll get deported, you'll get terminated, you'll become homeless, you'll be kicked out of the country, then how are you going to assert their rights? This is the entire structure. We need to move away from this notion that people don't know enough or need rights education. What they need is the ability to autonomously take care of themselves, right? In COVID-19 or at any other point, frankly, you are making decisions every day to take care of yourself. You decide where to go, when to cover your face, where not to go. Migrants don't have that power. It's not because they don't know it. Similarly, the entire conversation on human trafficking makes it as if these are, very few bad apples and it's questions of criminality and illegality, and that's what needs to be dealt with. No, the problem is centrally the federal immigration law and the federal and the provincial labor laws that are working in tandem to create insecurity. There are few rare and exceptional moments when people are being in cases that could, be considered trafficking, and we work with those people. But by and large, the vast majority, 1 in 23 people in this country who are non-permanent residents are facing exploitation, abuse as a result of the laws that are being made in Parliament, not because of a trafficker.
I understand the point. I still think having access to materials in your own language is pretty invaluable and important, in order to know how to exercise those rights. I have a question now for Mr. Falconer. Mr. Falconer, with respect to the recent penalties that the IRPR has announced with respect to ensuring that employers have to help their employees, follow public health orders, including the Quarantine Act, which gives some pretty hefty penalties to employers. Their penalties range up to $1 million and permanent bans on hiring foreign workers. Do you think that is going to help in terms of the number of foreign workers that have contracted COVID-19 and to help the public health requirements be met by these employers?
I think with respect to that, the biggest issue, of course, will be enforcement and knowing exactly when there is violation going on. Actually, the best example I can think of with regards to where there could be better potential employment is actually, there's been suggestions for greater inspections going around the farms. Biggest one I would suggest honestly is involving the CFIA. And actually, I'm sharing this one from personal experience. When I was working in the orchards of BC, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency was around regularly, not for the purposes of necessarily reviewing the conditions of the workers, but they had to come because they wanted to test the condition of food and food safety that was due to export or even domestic consumption within Canada. Either creating sort of IRCC liaison officer or empowering CFIA officers with knowledge and the ability to inspect working conditions and enforcement public health measures, I think would go a far way to actually knowing how to enforce the restrictions that you actually mentioned previously.
I just want to mention that we issued this report in which we have complaints about employers breaking the Quarantine Act, and I've offered personally to ESDC on 3 occasions to look at them to the inspectors, and they haven't taken us up on the offer. And in most of the things that are happening outside of the Quarantine Act, this isn't about, so first of all, the inspections aren't happening despite us trying to physically force the information to the inspectors, but also it's not happening in quarantine. It's happening outside it. The problem is that what the employers are doing is legal and people are falling sick and people are dying. I think we need to be very clear that you can only inspect existing laws and the laws are broken.
Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
Well, 35 seconds.
My colleague, Mr. Kuzmarchuk, who is the parliamentary secretary to the Minister Qualtrough, has heard your offer to assist. I know that you guys helped the BC government recently and did some training in BC, so I'm sure he'll, pass on that message to his colleagues. And since I don't have any time left, thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos 2 témoins. Monsieur Hassan, je vais commencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hussein, I'll be asking you a question.
So, you're from the civil society. You support the temporary immigrant workers. I believe you have already, even in your testimony today, similarly to a report, you have presented some of the problems that these workers face in housing, sanitary conditions, workplace health and safety, and so on. These situations that you decry and that you're doing today, once again, as a representative of workers in those conditions, is this a perennial situation? Is it a temporary one? These situations that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis we're currently facing?
Unheeded warnings, and it's called unheeded warnings because we've been raising these warnings for half a century. Migrant farm workers have been coming to the country for 53 years.
OK. J'ai pas eu de traduction au début, mais ça va.
Sorry, I didn't hear the translation.
Continue.
Parce qu'au début de l'intervention de M. Hassan, il n'y avait pas de traduction du tout. Fait que c'est ce que je voulais juste mentionner, mais là, il y en avait. C'est correct. Merci.
Sorry, I don't hear the anymore. And I'm set at English. Okay, let me try. Basically, yes, these are ongoing problems. This is why I brought to the committee its own decisions, its own recommendations from 2012 and 2016 and from the Prime Minister. I'm going past the last 10 years, but these are perennial problems, and they're not just happening in farms, they're happening with domestic workers, with international students, with undocumented people, with migrant sex workers. Wherever citizenship is being denied, people are struggling, people are suffering, and we need to reverse the tide. And that means we need to rethink immigration away from two-tier or multi-tier immigration to a single-tier immigration system to give individuals the power to protect themselves. This is not about charity, it's about autonomy. People are ready and willing to take care of themselves. The federal government is tipping the scale in favor of exploitation right now.
So if I understand you, you're saying the main solution for you is permanent residency. Is that the message you are sending? That the best possible solution to solve a good number of these problems is the issue related to permanent residency. Will this solution apply to all temporary foreign workers that come to Canada to work? Let's look at the agri-food industry and farms. Is this wish shared by all these workers to achieve permanent residency?
We are the only national coalition of self-organized groups of migrants and undocumented people and international students. Over the last 3 months, we have written 7 different letters to various cabinet reports. I've done hundreds of interviews and reports. And we started with, minor policy adjustments. Please extend CERB, make sure it gets to people without saying, change this healthcare law. And as we have been talking, our people are dying and are hungry. I have spent my time talking to people about, how much lemon you need to put in a glass of water to kill your hunger properly because you have no income. I've spent my time talking to people about how they haven't left their house in 3 months because their children are sick and they're afraid of getting them and there's no money and support for them. We have spent our time talking to the families of those who have died, right? In each of these cases, no other solution is quick enough, comprehensive enough, and just enough except permanent resident status for all, and it needs to happen immediately. Agri-food, domestic work, international students, undocumented people. We need a single-step solution, our way out of the crisis. Look, this is an irreversible change that we've created in people's lives. It's not going to be, there's no normalization.
J'aurais une dernière question, Monsieur le Président.
Last question, Mr. Chair, if I may. Yes, you have a minute left. For temporary foreign workers, especially in the agri-food sector, we know how important these workers are. We know there have been some delays, some backlogs, and I believe in Mexico, just recently, yesterday, I believe there was an agreement with the workers, and in each province, we are not able to fill these positions. Initially, we had criticized this in some way. The federal government had provided $1,500 for each worker in businesses. So they also had the responsibility to control and supervise things. I don't think that was sufficient. So I'm asking my question to Mr. Falconer. Do you think the federal government has to take charge of the supervision and make sure that the conditions in which these workers are welcome here are respected?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll go back to my previous point with regards to inspections. That the agency that you have at hand right now that is on hand every day, and with reference not just to quarantine conditions but also physical distancing, I think that should absolutely be something that we consider putting in place immediately on farms and in other within homes as well. To the extent that we may want to consider the option of housing temporary foreign workers outside of the farm if physical distancing cannot be accomplished in quarters, even if that might need to be supported by the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. Merci, Madame Chabot. Next, we have Ms. Kwan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your presentation. I'm going to first go to Mr. Hassan. In the report, Unheeded Warnings, a number of issues were identified, glaring issues, if you might, that included lack of permanent resident status upon landing in Canada, fear of health being related to fear of lost income, wage theft, border closures and delays resulted in lost income, and workers were coerced to travel to Canada because no income supports were available. Social distancing, adequate food and health information during quarantine, housing concerns and limitations on worker mobility, intimidation, surveillance, threats, and racism, and intensification of work, including longer work hours and weeks without breaks. These are just some of the issues to which the report highlighted. And so first off, my first question is, could you submit your full report to the clerk so that we actually have it on record along with the recommendations from the report?
Yes, absolutely. I can do that immediately.
Thank you. Yeah. And with respect to the recommendations contained in the report, I just want it on the public record as well. Are those all the recommendations that you're calling for the government to act on immediately?
So yes, we're calling for the government to implement every recommendation in this report vis-a-vis farm workers, including social distancing, healthcare access, and immigration status for all.
And you mentioned that you have been in touch, or you try to be in touch with the government, with the ministry, and you have had no response. Can you just elaborate on that for our understanding? Who have you tried to reach, and how many times, and the status of that situation?
This is the first time I'm speaking to elected officials in government. Since March 15th, which is when we started writing our letters, we've written 6 letters plus this report, multiple requests for meetings, and not a single. And we are the only organization that represents migrants directly. There's a lot of lawyers, academics, experts who speak on behalf of people or who have opinions, but nothing about us without us. And frankly, it's very clear that the government is not able in responding to what is a life and death situation. I mean, these 3 men who are behind me, who I want you to remember and look at and see, are just one of the series of injustices that are happening. We could tell you stories for weeks about the intense pain and suffering that is happening to migrants because they don't have CERB, they don't have healthcare, they don't have jobs, lives and livelihoods are at stake.
The letters to which you submitted to the ministries calling for action, could you also submit those letters for this committee as well for our record?
Yes.
Okay. And you have received no response from any of the ministers' offices to your letters?
No. And we've CC'd the Federal Cabinet Committee on all of them. We've received no response. We've requested meetings and have heard nothing back from any elected official in government.
So since the issue has surfaced with respect to the deaths of the migrant workers, has nobody from government reached out to your organization to talk to you about how they could work together with you to address these concerns?
No elected officials. We did speak to ESDC right before our report and after. Both times we offered recommendations, but we also offered to give them the names of the employers, and we asked for them to put it in writing about what they would do with the information. I sent them a reminder a week later, and we've heard nothing back. We were told about that they would put the conversation in writing. I asked for a written log, even that's not been produced. Frankly, no one is paying attention to the fact that 1 in 23 people in this country are suffering. And that's because there's this dehumanization. We keep talking about the food supply and the labor shortage as if these are friends, families, people with feelings. And there needs to be an understanding of that rather than the dehumanization that's happening. I'm sorry, I'm emotional.
Thank you very much. Prior to this time, your organization and others have called on action from the government ongoing. And have you had any, or maybe you can share with us, where you've highlighted violations and abuses with examples and experiences of the temporary foreign workers? What follow-up has there been done from the government side with respect to these complaints?
I'm just going to give you one much more recent example. We talked about these deaths. We released this report, and Minister Marco Mendicino went on air and he said, the agri-food immigration pilot. He said, we've heard you. In fact, it's our idea. We've already done it. He knows, the minister knows that these men could not apply for the program. And yet he chooses to lie and spin. The Prime Minister and the ministers keep issuing media statements rather than actually talking to real people. Who has talked to a single migrant or undocumented person in the last 3 months? You know, over the last 6 years with this government, we have held multiple meetings where we've brought immigration and employment officials, invited politicians to come meet directly with migrants who've always said the same thing. You smile, they nod, they go home. And they create these partial programs without any thought. Like the entire quarantine was designed to keep Canadians protected, not migrants. That's what happened. The $1,500 were given to protect Canadians. And therefore, as you can see, that's who was protected, not migrants. Migrants are treated as the risk and the threat rather than as people who are at risk. There's a central component of racism and dehumanization that's built into in the entire temporary immigration system, and it appears at every turn.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Mr. Hassan, the parliamentarians on the committee are not allowed to use a word that you used in your response. I would ask you to be judicious in your choice of words, please.
Sorry,
Mr. Albus,
I don't.
You accused Minister Mendicino of lying. Mr. Albus, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd just like to thank both of our witnesses for sharing your concerns and your expertise with us today. You know, I obviously am from the Okanagan, and so we do have a fair amount of temporary foreign workers, seasonal agricultural workers in my riding. And in the last election, one issue I heard about at one of our immigration debates was specific that seasonal agricultural workers pay various payroll taxes like employment insurance and Canada Pension Plan, but are obviously not eligible to access those services. Now, this issue, you know, was that simply just exempting them from the requirement would create an unlevel playing field for employers to hire seasonal agricultural workers over Canadians, as it would be cheaper without the employer portion of these taxes. Now, I've been trying to get some facts as to why this policy exists in its current, and then also how to deal with it. Do either of you have any comments in regards to the policy of having seasonal agricultural workers pay these taxes or pay payroll taxes, and how we can best address this situation?
I think there are two major issues. One is EI is not available, including paternal and maternal benefits, which used to be available, and then the government took it away from migrant farm workers. The other issue is that the way it's situated, basically when you finish your work, you're on a work permit, you finish your work, and then you are unemployed for 4 months, but because EI does not, there are no benefits don't travel across borders, essentially. Which is why so many migrant farm workers came here. If CERB was accessible to them, because they knew they were going to die. We were told, we received hundreds of calls saying, if we come, we know we'll die. And they were right, because 3 are dead. But they came because CERB was not accessible to them. So EI, CPP, all benefits need to be portable and need to be accessible to migrants. And the reason that's not happening is because of the way the system's created, but also bank accounts. Like you deposit CPP in Canadian bank accounts. How do you access it in Mexico, right? There's some very simple technical issues, but there's these like overall issue around portability. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Faulkner, the interpretation's having some trouble picking you up. If you can just hold your mic close, that would be of some assistance. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, as my other panelists here mentioned that previously, we used to have access to paternity and maternity benefits through EI for temporary foreign workers in Canada. I think a restoration of those and just a simple extension of EI to all workers in Canada would go greatly to reducing the stress that many of them may feel, especially with regards to if they have to go off work for a while. Using, again, specifically the example of this pandemic, but even in my own experience, workers are often hesitant to call in sick. They're hesitant to report injuries because they are afraid of losing time with relation to work. And I think being able to allow them to get EI would greatly reduce the likelihood that they are subjected to a pandemic like COVID-19. We may also wish to consider allowing them to receive EI if they're abroad before they come back. Many of these workers are often repeat workers, meaning they come back again year after year. Those would be the 2 points I have with regards to employment insurance.
So if the current policy is maintained, that means people are putting into CPP or into EI without having the eligibility for those benefits. Obviously, there's a question of fairness. Would it be as simple as giving the money back if it's something that they can't claim? Is that something you think it'd be, or as you both said, that perhaps reevaluating whether or not someone can be qualified for those?
I'm not sure about the exact nuances of such a program, but I'll give you an example of something that you could do. Temporary foreign workers do file taxes within Canada, allowing them to receive an EI deduction or EI rebate through taxation might be one possibility. But again, I just provide that as an idea, not a specific recommendation.
Sure. Okay. Now, we've had some discussion earlier about the $1,500 that was given to farmers to be able to isolate workers. And, obviously anyone that's coming into the country right now, whether you're a resident of Canada or not, are receiving these isolation orders. But the question to my mind is whether or not all farmers that are receiving this $1,500, whether or not there are checks to make sure that they are self-isolating, and as Mr. Falconer said, that they are safe. Has to either of you, do you think that the government is, following through to make sure that the health and safety of both Canadians and the workers themselves are being followed up in the use of this $1,500 grant?
So let's get the numbers right. The federal government has given $900 million, that's nearly $1 billion, to agri-food businesses since March 15th. Most of these employers make a profit of over $500,000, and the vast majority of them hire migrant workers. So it's not just $1,500 per worker for the quarantine period. Now, in that $1,500, there was no guarantee, for example, of food to be provided to migrant farm workers. That wasn't written into the rules. What has happened as a result is we've worked with workers where 13 workers got 1 bag of potatoes to eat for a week. 6 workers got 1 carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, and that's legal. Okay, so the employers are using it to change quarantine conditions for people to social distance for 2 weeks, but then right after that, they ran them in 40 people to a dorm with access to 1 shower, or 35 people with 4 toilets. And the quarantine period doesn't cover it, and the $1,500 is not about it. So actually, that $1,500 was just for the first 14 days. Those rules were not followed, but the rules were bad, and it didn't. And all of the problems have arisen right after the quarantine period. So I think $1 billion has been given to big businesses. Now, in most of these cases where in quarantine, where workers weren't given food, the employers charged them for food. So they're taking money from the government and they're taking money from the workers. And we've documented 500 cases of that in this report that was released 3 weeks ago.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain, and thank you, Mr. Albus. We're well past time. Mr. Vaughan, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. And to Mr. Hussain, many of the standards you're talking about there are provincially enforced standards in terms of the work conditions. Which province is doing it the best?
So labor conditions, yes, are under the provincial law, but the federal government, by creating tied work permits, indentures workers to those laws.
I understand. I'm just asking, looking for the best regime if we're to model improvements.
For the federal government, the best proposal is permanent resident status for all. The labor regime in BC, at least in quarantine specifically, just for those 14 days, but by taking over housing, made things a little bit better. But What happens after those 14 days? These deaths are happening afterwards. The labor intensification is happening afterwards. So there is a recruiter law that's good in Manitoba that I think should be created across the country. There's access to healthcare laws without the 3-month wait period without another country. So there's different provincial laws and different issues. WSIB, workers' compensation, minimum wage laws, recruiter laws, healthcare, each of them are different. We've already, to this committee, actually provided a comparison. I can resend that to look at best practices.
And in terms of those best practices, if we level the playing field up, that would be one of the ways in which to improve day-to-day conditions. But your fundamental position is that all temporary foreign workers should have access to permanent residency status immediately upon taking a job, or over time.
All temporary foreign workers, all international students, all refugees, basically a single-tier immigration system. Any multi-tiered system where you are in a system of temporariness for a few years means there's exploitation in those years. And if there are exceptions, so for example, in provincial nominee programs, you need to get a letter from your boss to say that this is a full-time job offer. We've seen employers say to a group of 6 workers, we'll pick one of you, right? Now, none of them are complaining. They're actually, the employer was taking money back from their paychecks in return for this promise of a letter. Anytime you have a temporary system and you set up rules for anything after, there's exploitation. There's just no way around it. And there's no way to actually stop it because you don't complain, because complaining means you face deportation. That's why single-tier immigration, permanent status for all, undocumented, migrant, student, single system.
The minute you land in the country, you're a permanent resident.
The minute you land in the country, but first let's talk about the people already here. A regularization program.
No, appreciate it. But if it's single-tiered, it's single-tiered, which means that you apply, you get recruited, you land, regardless of how you work out on the farm, you've got permanent residency.
Like any other permanent resident in the country who comes from across the country, right? Like everyone comes as 300,000 people get permanent residency each year. They land without a job offer, right? They get PR. We do that even with refugees, like some refugees, not others. There is a permanent system of immigration. Historically, that was the only system. This shift to temporariness is an aberration. It's recent, and it's particularly developed to ensure that certain people profit more. That's it. That's its only. There's no actual benefit to Canada. There's benefit to employers and universities. There's no benefit to the healthcare system, to public health, to laws. If you just had a single system, you wouldn't have to have this conversation. Things would be simpler. So we have to ask, who does it benefit?
And to Mr. Faulkner, the change that is being scoped out here differently by the two of you as witnesses, has it been costed in terms of the impact on what it would cost to accommodate these sorts of changes and what that impact would be to the food agriculture business? Not to suggest that there should be a price on human rights, but just so we understand what we're talking about as an impact.
And to clarify here, I provided, and I can certainly provide this to the committee afterwards, a brief including several recommendations, again, which range everything from housing to EI. With regards to the permanent residency, I have never seen any parliamentary budget officer's report with regards to what would it cost and what would be the benefits from a financial terms, I should say, of immediately granting everybody permanent residency. If I can just actually raise one suggestion or one point right here with regards to that, in a forthcoming paper we have from the school, we actually address we did analysis of transportation logistics as it relates to the agricultural sector as well. And this is actually one area when you look at the total agricultural system, including on farms and in processing, transportation is the one where you actually have a good, what you might want to call transition rate, meaning that about for every year, let's say about 1,000 temporary foreign workers come to work in transportation logistics, about 96% become permanent residents. And yet we have been able to increase the number, there have been an increasing number of temporary foreign workers coming to work in that sector every year. I always say the saying that if everybody were angels, we wouldn't have to make these arguments. But for those who are maybe concerned that offering permanent residency towards farm workers might somehow reduce the supply of farm workers, I think the presence of temporary workers, foreign workers in other sectors such as transportation proves evidence to the contrary, that people will continue to want to come in and work in Canada. Again, and I understand that the other panelists might disagree with me on this, but I think the Atlantic Immigration Program with accumulation of hours could be adapted to an agricultural immigration pilot, but it needs to be accompanied with, I think, with other reforms that concentrate on the safety of workers. And certainly permanent residency does produce good healthcare and income outcomes. Immediately, we can also do much more in relations to housing and employment insurance as well. And to the member, Ms. Kuzi, licensure so that workers can actually be able to practice in the fields they train for as well.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner, and thank you, Mr. Vaughn. That takes us to the top of the hour. Mr. Hassan and Mr. Faulkner, the connection that you have to your work, the passion that you show for your work is very evident in your presentations. We thank you for your service to the communities involved. We have greatly benefited from your presentations today, and it will aid our work going forward. So thank you very, very much for being with us. Colleagues, we are going to now suspend just for a couple of minutes. We just need to do one sound check. So we are now suspended.
Have we figured out the concern?
Interpreters, are you ready to go? Can I get a good to go from the interpreters, please?
Would you speak?
I would like to welcome Ms. Debbie Douglas, Executive Director for the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, et Monsieur Fernand Thibodeau.
Fernand Thibodeau, Vice President and Spokesperson for Seasonal Workers Help and Support.
Ms. Douglas, with her opening remarks. You have 7.5 minutes. Ms. Douglas, welcome to the committee. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am joining you from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I will speak to you about 3 priorities that must be considered by the government in its COVID response: regularization of immigration status, access to benefits and supports for all, and immigration selection. First, regularization of immigration status. And I know that you heard from a presenter before me, Hassan. Canada has a large and growing population with precarious immigration status living and working here. That includes refused refugee claimants from Haiti, working in long-term care and other essential services in the Greater Montreal area, and undocumented people working in the food supply chain, in personal care work, cleaning, and more. They pay taxes and fees, and some even pay personal income tax, but they cannot access government benefits or programs. Because of their precarious immigration status, undocumented workers are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Given the nature of our temporary worker programs, the majority of such workers are racialized. In these COVID times, many are working in unsafe conditions, feeling they cannot say or do anything for fear they would lose their jobs. And clearly, they are needed because employers continue to employ them, and most likely also pay them lower wages. Undocumented women are among those most vulnerable to exploitation, including domestic and intimate partner violence. These women are also predominantly racialized. We think these unprecedented times present Canada with an opportunity to seriously consider a broad immigration status regularization program to allow people with precarious immigration status to gain permanent residence. Canada already has at least 2 pilot programs of this kind, one in the GTA focused on workers in the construction sector, and another more recent program for certain agricultural workers. While there are only estimates of how many people are here with precarious immigration status, we know those numbers have grown over time, particularly when there are changes to various immigration programs and people have fallen through the gaps. A number of such residents have been living and working in Canada, sometimes for many, many years. They are already established, they have networks and likely even family members who may be permanent residents or Canadian citizens. Families with mixed citizenship, Canadian children with undocumented parents is not unusual in Canada, and these Canadian children are often denied benefits. Refugee claimants, migrant workers, international students, people who are undocumented or have otherwise precarious status present a good pool of candidates to draw from to meet the immigration targets already set by government and which we know we will not meet this year and most likely will not meet next year either because of the pandemic. People with less than full residency status or citizenship are members of our communities and contribute to our economy. We gain far more from their presence here than they get back. I say let's do the right thing and let them gain full permanent resident status. The other issue, which is related, is access to benefits for everyone. Building on my earlier point, people with precarious immigration status pay taxes and fees, and some even pay personal income tax, but they cannot access government benefits or programs. Research shows that they put far more into our economy than they use in publicly funded services. During the COVID crisis, many have lost their jobs in the informal economy and thus their income. They have no financial support or access to any benefits. Recently, OCASI, my organization, collaborated with some of our member agencies and others across the province, Toronto and Southern Ontario in particular. Working with 2 private foundations, we were able to secure some dollars to provide some support to those without any income. It wasn't a lot of money, and so you can imagine it went very quickly. Agencies have also privately fundraised to address the urgent need they are seeing for financial support and basic resources. But these efforts are small, they are highly localized, they don't reach all those that need help, and of course, they're not sufficient. We appreciate the fact that the government has given a boost to the Canada Child Benefit. This is welcome for many low-income families with minor children, but it is a benefit that is not available to people with precarious immigration status, even if they have Canadian-born children, as I mentioned earlier. We also welcome the one-time top-up to the Old Age Security and Guaranteed Income Supplement. These benefits, however, are not available to permanent residents who have lived here for less than 10 years, even if they have lived and worked here for, say, 9.5 years. At this time, when even their own family members may have suffered loss of income, there may be literally no one they can rely on for income support. These are very difficult times for so many residents, but especially for people with precarious immigration status. I urge you to call for an extension of government benefits and programs to all residents, regardless of immigration status, until we can weather this crisis. Government can do this by issuing a temporary social insurance number that people can use to apply. We will come out stronger as a society and be a better place to start rebuilding the economy, working safely and together. My final point is to urge you to open up economic immigration selection. If there is one thing we have learned during this pandemic, it is how much of what we consider essential work is unseen. We notice it only when it is missing, when there is no food on our table, when there is no one taking care of elderly Canadians in long-term care homes, cooking for them and cleaning up after them, when there is no one to package and deliver the food, medicine, toilet paper, and other essential supplies that we need. But these are not the jobs in our immigration selection program, which is skewed to highly skilled workers and highly educated students in certain sectors. And don't get me wrong, yes, we need those people with those skills. And we also need those who grow and harvest our food, work in our meat and fish plants, build our homes, who work as caregivers, cleaners, general laborers who work in our call centers. Let us learn from the experience and open up immigration selection to match the reality of what we are seeing on the ground in labor markets across Canada. In the interim, we should start giving people who are already here an opportunity to become permanent residents if that is what they're interested in doing. Some may not, they may prefer to return to their home countries, but there are many others who want to stay and have already started taking the steps towards that by working and building a life here. Mr. Chair, if I may, in the time that I have left, I want to acknowledge the positive work relationship that has been happening in the sector in collaboration with the federal government, which I believe underlines the importance of consistent relationship building and joint work as happens through our sector's National Settlement and Integration Council, NSIC. OCASI, my organization, as you know, is the umbrella for over 230 agencies across Ontario who provide services and programs to newcomers to Canada. The sector, and I know I can speak for my sister umbrella organizations across the country, where we were relieved and encouraged that the federal government declared our sector an essential service. And we have two primary reasons for absolutely seeing this as good policy. The primary role of immigrant and refugee serving agencies is to support newcomers in the process of building a new life in Canada.
Douglas, I'll get you to wrap up. You're well over time.
I'm sorry. during the pandemic, during the whole COVID situation, our agencies have been the place where newcomers have been turning to for support, for information about income supports, for support in filing income taxes, for interpretation and translation of information about income supports. So we wanted to say a special thank you to IRCC for keeping the sector going by having workers stay on the job and by being flexible in allowing organizations to be responsive to the needs that they're seeing in their local community. Thank you. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. Suite, Monsieur.
Mr. Thibodeau, the mic is yours. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the honorable members of the committee. I'm here today with you to speak about the situation of the seasonal workers that live in regions that depend on these. These seasonal industries have always played a significant role in the Canadian economy, and they are still very important in certain regions of the country where they supply most of the available jobs. Unfortunately, based on this dependency on seasonal industries in more and more regions, we have had a lot of difficulty balancing things in terms of support. But if workers take all the high season jobs available, they will not be able to survive the slower periods. In a good year, a seasonal worker will work 14 weeks or the equivalent of 525 hours. Even in regions with more than 16% unemployment, they will only qualify for 33 weeks of support. So they have 5 weeks without income. The problem is that during the slow season, there is no work available. And the lack of economic diversity makes us dependent on the EI program. So you have weeks on end without revenue and difficulties within the regions. People are living on the edge. They have to move towards the major urban centers. The pilot project from the government, providing additional weekends, has given a significant boost, but it's not sufficient. As I just mentioned, even in a region with the maximum unemployment rate, we still have this dark hole. It has always existed, but for most of us, things have gotten worse over the past few years, and it's because most of our communities are part of unemployment regions where the unemployment rate is low and doesn't really reflect the real situation of the local economy. For example, in Restigouche-Albert, our small community depends on seasonal industries, and they're connected to the mountain area, and so that drops the unemployment rate. Another example, the region of the Upper North Shore, the unemployment rate is 9% locally, and the reference rate for the greater region for employment insurance. So to qualify, they have to do almost 700 hours of work, and that's really difficult. And even if they qualify, they only have 18 weeks of support. Another issue, in several of our communities, the unemployment rate is dropping, but it's not because there is no more work. It's because of the aging population. There are fewer job applicants for the same amount of work available. That's why we believe that the pilot project should be improved. We have made representations to the minister towards that, but unfortunately, these were not recognized. This is what we recommend. Boost to 10 weeks the number of additional weeks in the designated regions. These additional weeks will be adjusted to the maximum number of available weeks for benefits, 45 weeks and more. Facilitate access to the pilot project by exchanging the eligibility criteria for seasonal workers. Right now, the rules are quite complex and arbitrary, so true seasonal workers don't qualify. We propose that they mention if a layoff is seasonal or not, so that these people are not judged. Look at the map of the regions of EI to better reflect the labor market condition. This map has not been changed for over 20 years. So I think we have to do some cleaning up there. And I would congratulate the unemployment insurance workers and all the committees that worked hard in even the CNC, because right now our EI offices are closed and we have to accompany these people. Can also change the parameters for the EI program for all Canadians, 420 hours to be eligible, and 35-40 weeks more benefits, and using the best 12 weeks to establish the benefits level. Such a formula will have the advantage of providing more simplicity and fairness for those who are worried about possible abuses in this situation. I would just like to remind you of two things. First of all, the EI benefits doesn't even provide the equivalent of the minimum wage. That in itself is not sufficient to go beyond the low-income threshold of the government. Based on the control and evaluation assessment, they only use 20 weeks out of 35 weeks of the benefits that they need. The majority of Canadians use this program quite reasonably. On the other hand, 33% of beneficiaries spend up their benefits before they can find new work. These are the people that really worry us, and I hope they worry you too. In ending, I would like you to note two significant points in my testimony. Our regions require assistance to get back to work. Unemployment insurance will not solve all problems, but it does play a significant role. It has to be better adapted to provide better support for our workers in our regions. And when I look at this, I'm saying the EI right now, we have to go look into it. There are significant issues with it because it has not been able to respond to the needs of people during the COVID. We're forced to come up with a new program. That's the SERB to solve their problems. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau.
So starting with Mr. Albus for 6 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for your testimony here today and for sharing your expertise with our committee. In the last hour, I did ask two of our witnesses to talk a little bit about the payroll taxes that those people that come on a temporary foreign worker or seasonal agricultural worker program pay into the system, particularly Canada Pension Plan and EI, knowing that they won't be able to benefit from those programs down the road. Obviously, there's concerns that if those payroll taxes were not paid, then there would be an inequality between a Canadian worker and someone on a temporary foreign worker seasonal agricultural worker program. Do you have any idea why this policy exists and why currently someone who is in this country putting into the system with no expectation to get out is set up that way, and any suggestions on how best to address this without creating an inequality between Canadian workers and those that are here on a temporary basis?
Mr. Chair, if I may, member, my sense is that temporary foreign workers do not mind paying payroll taxes. What they want are access to those benefits when they need them, whether or not they get sick and or there is a shortage of jobs. They want to be able to access the benefits, including if they have to return to their country and have some time before they are able to become gainfully employed. One of the reasons temporary foreign workers come to Canada to work in such extreme situations, and they come back year after year, is because of a lack of opportunity often in their home country. So I think we should be looking at how is it that we can ensure that they have access when they need it to the social benefit programs that they've paid into, particularly CPP once they've reached retirement age, but also EI when there's a downturn, and or if, as sometimes happen, they speak up for their rights, they speak up for the rights of others, and then they're not brought back the following year, so that they should be able to tap into the EI system while they resolve that situation.
Mr. Thibodeau, did you want to comment? Okay, well, maybe I'll move on to the next question. I also asked about this in the first hour, but wanted to get both of your opinions. The government is giving $1,500 per worker to employers for support during mandatory quarantine. Do you feel employers are using this money effectively to support workers while they must be on lockdown? Maybe Ms. Douglas, we'll start with you, but Mr. Thibodeau, we'd also like to hear from you.
What we've heard from our colleagues who are working more closely and more directly with migrant workers is that there's been very little monitoring of that situation. And so even in those workplaces where folks were able to quarantine safely, relatively speaking, they then went back into often congregate living arrangements, hence the rapid number of infections we've been seeing in southern Ontario, as an example. So without monitoring, without farmers and other employers needing to demonstrate that the dollars really are being used to keep workers safely, not sure how it is that we can address the situation. The money has been sent out. We need to hold those folks accountable to ensure that workers are able to social distance, not only within their living arrangements, but also when they're out in the workplace.
Is Mr. Thibodeau, does he have any feedback on this question?
I have to say that in terms of the seasonal industry workers, they need money for protection. I can say there have been some walls amongst themselves, protective walls, but we see in the factories, we see people that have had some salary increases, 50 cents, some $2, some $4 to be able to work during the COVID period. And the workers have raised a lot of issues. They want to know why somebody had 50-cent increase or $2 or $4. I can't answer that. I think it's at the employer's discretion, but I think it's tough that these people were not able to have the same salary increases for everybody, because these people work very hard in heat. They wear masks with visors, and they are going through hell currently.
Specific, because those do sound like those are on site, and most of those would probably be provincial, but I'm talking more about the requirement to isolate for 2 weeks before going into regular work. It does sound like there is some question about value for money and proper monitoring. So the federal government has also stopped audits of employers and is only doing virtual spot checks. Is this failure to do audits exacerbating the problems that we are seeing?
Vous parlez à moi, Monsieur Thibodeau?
Are you asking me?
Alors moi, c'est comme que je vous dis, les travailleurs.
Well, as I said, the seasonal industry workers, certainly the tourist workers have gone back, and the forestry workers have yet to go back. I don't know what is causing that, but those who are working right now haven't really had full income to be able to assess. I'm not aware if they've even received the $1,500.
Douglas, Ms. Douglas, do you have a very brief response to that?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Albas. Mr. Dong, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, I want to thank both witnesses for coming to today's committee and give us very good suggestions and their observation on both fronts. And Ms. Douglas, first of all, I want to thank OCASI for doing all you've done. I've dealt with OCASI quite a bit in the past in terms of supporting refugees and newcomers. And I want to thank your advocacy. Back in March, OCASI posted 6 recommendations about how to protect all workers, including newcomers, permanent residents during COVID-19. With the introduction of CERB, and we know that the CERB does include international students and foreign workers, and some changes made to postgraduate work permit, and also immigration programs, where we made quite a bit of change for international students, including allowing them to work full-time if they're in the essential service. And in my writing, actually, from Seneca, I've heard that hundreds of new grads now stepping forward and join the healthcare front. Many of those were international students that recently graduated. How would you assess the early response by the federal government to COVID-19?
Oh, we were very pleased when CERB was announced, and especially how flexible and easy it was for those who qualified. We were also glad that the government listened and then brought more and more international students into it. The concern that we have is that there are a significant number of folks, and we were talking about folks with precarious immigration status and those who are undocumented who have not been able to access CERB. And as you know, Cassie, we've been having these conversations with every minister we can find to talk about that, to talk about the folks who have been here for many years and have fallen through the gaps for whatever reason, are now undocumented, have been working in the informal economy, have lost their jobs and have no access to provincial benefits, no access to income supports like CERB. As I said in my presentation, there are very many community-based organizations who are trying to raise funds. OCASI itself worked with two foundations, the Atkinson and the new Maria Masifa Foundation through the World Education Services, to provide some relief to a number of families, particularly in Southern Ontario and here in Toronto. Those folks continue to need support. But yes, in terms of the rapid response to CERB, the expansion to ensure that international students were able to get in the flow of information, although at the front end, we had some concerns about the lack of translated information. Agencies really stepped up to ensure that communities, the message was being pushed out in whichever way through various first language media and those kinds of things. So that uptake for those who qualify was very, very positive. The folks we were concerned about are those who are continuing even now to fall through the cracks because they're falling between not eligible for provincial social assistance, not eligible for federal income supports. Something has to happen there.
Thank you. And we also see recently there were a lot of racist incidents in Canada and the United States, whether it's anti-Black racism, whether it's anti-Indigenous racism, or anti-Asian racism. And today, Angus Reid released a study, and I just want to quote, and which is with some shocking stats: 61% of the people that they surveyed that they have adjusted their routines in order to avoid run-ins or otherwise unpleasant encounters since COVID-19 outbreak began. And they interviewed quite a few Asian Canadians or Chinese Canadians. And also just over half are worried that Asian children are going to be bullied when they return to school due to COVID-19 outbreaks. So I know your agency does work with a large number of newcomers and immigrants from racialized community. What kind of challenges do you think you will face as we slowly recovering or reopening the economy? And of course, in September, we hope that the school will be reopened for our kids to return. And actually, I worry about, I asked this question on behalf of my kids who are in the public system.
Thanks for raising this issue. Yes, with the onset of COVID, we saw a sharp increase. It's not that anti-Asian racism didn't always exist, but we remember the nip-tipping nonsense and hatred that was happening here in Ontario not too long ago. We saw a significant increase in anti-Asian racism, whether or not people were being physically attacked, people were being called names. It didn't help that some of our political world leaders have absolutely encouraged those kinds of things, and Canada is not immune to it. We've also seen a rise in anti-Black racism, and just very blatantly both in terms of individuals who threaten Black lives all the time, including our security forces like the police, in terms of unarmed folks being killed, especially those at the intersection of race and mental health. So as a country, we really need to take this seriously. I think as the pandemic continues and as we begin to slowly reopen and we begin to look at some of the economic numbers, especially employment numbers, as we know historically, that racialized folks and those who are particularly immigrants and refugees will begin to be blamed. That's why I think it is so important for our government to be proactive, governments at all levels, to be proactive in terms of putting out public messages around issues of anti-racism and what does that really look like. But I think even more important, what this pandemic has shown are the huge gaps that exist because of race and racism and systemic race and racism. I think this is a time for governments to be bold, to look at policies that will shift and move how racialized folks are participating economically, are participating socially. We need, when I'm here talking about regularization of status. When we talk about those who are undocumented, vast majority are racialized folks. So when we respond in terms of a regularization program, it is also an anti-racism response.
Thank you, Mr. Dong, and thank you, Ms. Douglas. We're well past time. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Chabot, please, for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Madame Douglas, Mr. Thibodeau. Mr. Thibodeau, I will address my questions to you. You said right from the start that when seasonal industry workers that they are a very significant part of the Canadian economy. So let me start with a question before getting into the issue of the pilot projects and how to improve them. We know that there was a period of uncertainty with the COVID where seasonal workers found themselves in this black hole and they couldn't hope to find enough work to qualify for the next period. So they had access to this CERB. They had to go back to work and they were finally able to have access. So what's the solution? The period we're talking about is when we use up all our possible benefits in preparation for the next season. So the workers that haven't started work, that have the CERB, that this should be calculated to qualify for EI. Do you think it's a good solution or are there other measures? It is a good solution. The seasonal workers, as you said, they were in this black hole. There was a program with the federal government or provincial that ended in March. So at the end of March, I received over 300 calls in 1 week. People were calling me because there were a lot of people that were in the black hole situation. They had no income. So they had to rely on CERB for assistance. And then afterwards, they could get back to work. But I think we have to look at the entire EI system to respond to the needs of the seasonal workers, because seasonal workers Can we do some tourism? No. Can we go fishing? No. In the winter? No. There are so many activities. They can cut wood in the winter time. So it's very important to look at the entire EI system in order to respond to the needs without any bias to the needs of seasonal workers. They work 70, 80 hours a week in the heat. I don't think it's because they don't want to work. They are willing to work. We shouldn't forget that the economy for seasonal workers, I would think 60% of the economy in Canada is based on seasonal workers. Right now, there are stores that are open. So how are these stores able to stay open? It's retired people and seasonal people. The full-time workers, they work 9 to 5. Maybe a little later. So between 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock, how do these businesses keep running? It's the seasonal workers. So I think they bring great contribution to the economy. It's very important that the EI system, everything happening currently, should be looked at, should be reviewed. I think with COVID-19, there was a new push towards change. I think we must really change things, hours, look at the needs of all workers in terms of EI. And I think because of the COVID situation right now, it's a message we are sending to insist on change. We have to go in there and clean things up. Well, I'm not sure if you're aware, in terms of the pilot projects you were mentioning, the projects that were ending in May 2020, the minister's mandate was to improve the current pilot project by offering a permanent program that would pay consistent and reliable benefits. Have you seen that? There is a rule that has just been adopted where it was simply extended for a year. These pilot projects, as we know them currently, for 5 weeks. And I understand you, the issue of improvements, it's very important. Am I understanding you to say it's the industry that's seasonal, it's not the workers? We have to aim to eliminate as many of these black holes as possible by improving the normal EI benefit system. Yes, it's disappointing to see it's not permanent. We've had meetings with the entire maritime region. We've had meetings, and then we had meetings with all the people in Quebec and Rimouski, and they sent out a report for the minister. I don't think it's yet been taken into account. It has to be taken into account. I think they say it's still due to the COVID, but that's not a reasonable excuse. We should have a permanent system. The EI system has to be reviewed from A to Z and must be changed, especially for seasonal workers. So in the short term, you have to review the number of hours, you seem to be saying. We know that there are people who are not eligible, especially women, because of atypical nature of their work. If you had three solutions to have the sort of system that would solve the problem, what has to be resolved currently is changing the hours of work, come up with a new reform, and also look at the zone. The zone in Restigouche, Albert is very close to the mountain suburbs, so we have to change those zones. We are not just talking about changing a small part of the region. We should have protected regions for seasonal workers. We absolutely need that. So there's the zones, the hours, and we must have protected regions for workers, seasonal workers that respond to their needs. Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. Thank you, Madame Chabot.
For 6 minutes.
Is it my turn now, Mr. Chair?
It is.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for your presentation. I'm going to come to you, Ms. Douglas, if I may. First off, thank you for the work of OCASI in our community. Much appreciated. Now, in terms of rights for migrant workers, we heard from in our previous panel the situation that has prevailed for years and years and years. The most recent report that was made public, unheeded warnings. Have you had a chance to look at that report?
No, I haven't had a chance to look at the report in any details, but I think I'm familiar with some of the issues that may have been raised in there.
Okay, maybe I can go to this. On the critical issue in terms of addressing the abuses and the problems that exist in the system is to call for landed status on arrival. And so that is to recognize the workers on arrival and to give them status. Is that something that OCASI supports?
Absolutely. It is one of our policy priorities. We believe that workers should be landed on arrival. So we need to look at two things. We need to provide a system to land those who are already here and to then open up. And that's why I talked about looking at our selection, economic selection process as a way of addressing some of that. But those who are coming in to work temporarily should not be coming in temporarily, but should be coming in as permanent residents. I know that Hassan makes fun of people like me who say things like good enough to work, good enough to stay. And I absolutely agree with him. But it goes back to the earlier questioner about folks paying into our EI and CPP and not being able to have those benefits. So yes, workers should be landed on arrival, and those who are already here should be given some regularization program so that they can become permanent residents on their way to citizenship.
Okay, so there's a difference, right? Landed status on arrival versus given a program towards citizenship. So a pathway to citizenship is a two-step program, right? If you land here without status, then it's not getting the rights to which you're afforded. So there's a major difference.
Absolutely. And we took a turn to temporariness in Canada's immigration program decades ago, and we are seeing that it's led to dire exploitation of workers. Folks who have been coming here, if we look at the seasonal agricultural program, have been coming here for decades. They've been working, they've been paying into our system, and yet we send them home. We send them home when they're sick. We don't pay attention to, they have no access to benefits they may have paid into. We have taken up their labor, and then we send them back when we have no more use of them. That is wrong. If folks are going to come into Canada to work, they should be landed and they should have all of the responsibilities and privileges of having permanent resident status here in Canada. It will certainly take away the first point in terms of exploitation of employers being afraid to complain about work conditions because of fear of being fired and or fear of not being called back the following year.
Thank you very much for that clarification. On the issue with our immigration system, I mean, there once a point of time was a immigration system where we brought in people with a whole range of skills, not just high skills, not just economic immigrants, if you will, but rather the whole range of skills. And to boot, we actually also had a more extensive family reunification process that included sponsorship, for example, of siblings, as an example. Could you comment on whether or not the Canadian government should be changing our immigration system to incorporate the full range of skills, high, medium, and low skill workers as part of the permanent residence immigration stream?
Absolutely. If the pandemic has shown us one thing, it is who our essential workers are, and that's who it is that our immigration program should be targeting as well. Yes, we need, as I said, yes, we need those who are high skills. Yes, we need folks with postgraduate degrees, but on the ground for day-to-day living, for the people who keep our communities going. These are folks who are building our homes. These are folks who are packing our meats. They're picking our vegetables. They're planting them. These are the folks who are driving the trucks that gets it to the grocery store. There are folks who are working as cashiers. Those are the folks who drive our daily lives. And the fact that they do not have access to permanent residence through a transparent immigration process is just wrong. If nothing else, I think this is a time for the federal government to respond, to take a look at our point system, to see how it is that we can enhance, for lack of a better word, the express entry program, because I think this can be done through an economic class program. But I also think you're correct. I also think that we know that families are a net benefit to immigrants and refugees who are here. Expanding the family reunification class makes absolute sense to siblings, but also to children over age 22 is what I would suggest.
Thank you. One of the issues that is before us is Bill C-17. The government has tabled legislation to penalize people for quote unquote fraud in accessing CERB. And as we know, there was a lot of confusion about the program itself, and people were encouraged, even by parliamentary secretaries, encouraging people to apply, to interpret the government's rules liberally. And so to that end, what are your thoughts on the sections, section Part 4 of the bill that deals with the penalties with respect to CERB? Do you think that they should be withdrawn?
Yes, I think we need to be very careful that we don't demonize and stigmatize folks who needed to access the CERB program, especially those who are immigrant and refugees and or other migrants, and especially those who are racialized. C-17 sounds very punitive. Our concern is that it will end up punishing those who may have, in very good faith, thought they were eligible, applied, got the funds, realized they weren't, and never went back. Others who went to CERB when they should have been on EI. I really do not believe that our government response, especially when the government talked about putting this very flexible program in place, wanting to support Canadians, not wanting Canadians to fall through the cracks, and in the end to turn around and penalize what may very well have been good faith mistakes, I think is a dangerous slope to start going down.
Thanks, Ms. Douglas. Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Mr. Albus, for 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you wouldn't mind passing my time to Rosemary Falk.
Ms. Falk, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to thank both of our witnesses for both of your contributions to the work of this committee today. Many sectors in Canada, we know, lean heavily on the temporary foreign worker program. And in a riding like mine in rural Saskatchewan, I know how important it is to those in the agriculture sector specifically. It's a sector where the needs are absolutely time sensitive. We do know too that the recent deaths of migrant farm workers are truly heartbreaking, and the reports around their work conditions are a cause of great concern. The success of the program is obviously in the interests of workers, employers, and the government. And I would suggest that the success of the program has to be measured against not only the timely access to employees, but also against the health and safety of the work environment. So my question first is for Ms. Douglas. With those measures in mind, in your view, do employers of temporary foreign workers have the appropriate resources to comply with provincial and federal government's COVID-19 requirements?
We certainly hope so. They are employers. They're responsible for their employees' safety. Millions were sent their way as a way to support, certainly in our food sector. And so I would expect, and even those who didn't have access to government funds, I would expect employers, if they're bringing in workers, to have the proper accommodations in terms of isolation, but also in terms of their ongoing living conditions, to pay attention to ensuring safety in the workplace, and including things like social distancing, access to sanitizers, access to masks. Folks being able to not work overtime, folks having access to medical support when that is required. I think all of those things should be the responsible of the employer. But once again, if we're not being consistent with inspections, if we're not showing up in workplace without first announcing that inspectors are going to show up, these issues will continue to be exacerbated, and it is the migrant workers who are getting the short stick. We've all watched what's happened in Alberta in the meat packing plant. We are very concerned about what's happening on our farms here in southern and southwestern Ontario. So yes, it's the employer's responsibility, but it's also the government's responsibility to ensure that the inspections that are necessary are consistent and are happening, and that employers who are not following the rules are being penalized.
And are you aware of any specific barriers in meeting any of those requirements?
Well, what we've been hearing from migrant workers is that they are living in congregate spaces where there are a number of folks in one room. So even those who came in quarantine, they get put back into congregate. As I said, we are not surprised at the infection. We're angry about it. We're concerned about it. We're concerned about, as one of the members said, about the deaths that have happened of migrant workers. But yes, I believe that if employers are going to be given permission to bring in workers from overseas, they must demonstrate that they have the ability to keep them safe, and government is responsible for ensuring that is happening.
Thank you. Additionally, if either of you could please comment on practical steps the provincial or federal governments could take to better ensure the effective implementation of these types of requirements.
My colleague, would you like to speak?
Non, c'est correct. Allez-y.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
As I said, right, inspection, the provincial governments are responsible for enforcing labor laws. Again, it's about going in and ensuring that the workplaces are following guidelines that's been put in place for COVID. But even before COVID, we had those concerns in terms of unsafe workplaces, in ensuring that employees had their rights protected, that they were not being penalized when they tried to stand up for themselves or to assert their rights. And so for me, there isn't a difference between whether or not it's a provincial jurisdiction or federal jurisdiction. The issue is that employees need to be kept safe, and employers have a responsibility to ensure that, and the governments have a responsibility to ensure Canadians and Ontarians, in my case, that the workers that we're bringing in are being kept safe within the workplace and within the living space for those who are living with their employer.
Thank you, Ms. Falk and Ms. Douglas. Finally, we're going to go to Mr. Turnbull, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And hi, Ms. Douglas. Great to have you here and great to see you again. Mr. Thibodeau, it's great to hear your testimony as well. I have questions, and obviously I think we're all concerned about the outbreaks in southwestern Ontario on some farms, mostly in Essex County, I believe. I know our government's working to address these issues. In terms of Ms. Douglas, you actually said, I think just a moment ago, in response to Ms. Falk's question, that we need to make sure inspections are consistent and they're happening. Do you think Service Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada and local health units working together to ensure those inspections happen, do you think that would improve and address the non-compliance that we might be seeing?
I'm not sure of the capacity of local health organizations in the middle of pandemic when they're paying attention to the larger issue of safety and putting out policies. I do think, however, that the provinces must beef up their inspections. We were a bit alarmed when we found out that inspectors in Ontario were told that they can call in to do their inspections at the height of the COVID, at the same time that we were having conversations about opening the borders and allowing migrant workers to come in, and the federal government had announced that significant amount of money to employers. The fact that we didn't make those links to ensure that the funds were being spent for what they should, that public health guidelines, social distancing was put in place, that once folks came out of self-isolation, they had living spaces that did not, and then exposed them to the virus, that all of the things I said to the other questioner.
So you think we need physical inspections, I think is what I'm hearing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And consistently and without warning at times.
Thank you. And Mr. Thibodeau, did you want to comment on that?
Well, as far as the seasonal workers, it was very hard. They said the COVID, as we all know, is very dangerous, but it felt like they did not really have information. They were always worried. They were really troubled about getting back to the factories. You have 300 people working, and they are working very close together. And I have to say, initially they had said they would set up some walls, separation walls. That never happened. So as far as protection and all that, I do have a lot of concerns. So people were worried, yes.
Another question. And in terms of enforcing, there's some pretty severe penalties. I understand there's about I think $1 million that employers can be fined, and a ban on participating in hiring temporary foreign workers in the future. So it seems particularly punitive, and to me would serve as a good deterrent. Would you agree with that? That those fines are and penalties are enough to ensure that employers are actually following the rules?
Well, I would say so. As I said, people are always concerned. They are worried. So many of them have called me to say, Fernand, we're not really protected. They just give us a visor with a little mask, a little face mask, and sometimes people even collapse and ambulances scam. These are not humane working conditions. So New Brunswick Labour Department, Labour Canada, they have to look at this. If the safety of the employees is really being protected. Otherwise, I think we have to talk to the employers.
What level of government enforces those labor conditions? Enforces regulation? Is it the provincial government?
Provincial government is responsible for our labor laws. The federal government is responsible for the migrant workers program. Okay. So hence they both have some responsibility.
They both have a hand in it. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you really quickly is Minister Mendicino had testified before this committee and talked about temporary foreign workers being given an implied status and a significant amount of flexibility being added to their work permits. Do you think that that's sufficient in terms of, you were talking about, Ms. Douglas, about regularization of the whole process being a broader opportunity? Do you think the implied status is a good step forward during the pandemic?
Well, implied status was necessary so that we didn't have a disruption in the workforce. Things shut down. Folks were work permits were just running out, needed to have it renewed, couldn't renew. It makes sense to give implied status, but instead, implied status has nothing to do with regularization. I think that, as we've been saying, folks who are here to work and to contribute, folks who have been working and have gotten sick, folks who are here undocumented and have established themselves. I think this is the moment for us to do bold steps and to put in place a regularization program for those who are here. And then, secondly, to take a look at our immigration program, including our economic class as well as our family reunification class, and see what changes we can make there so that when we're bringing in workers, they're coming in as permanent residents, right? Similar to when we bring in convention refugees, for example, they're permanent residents on arrival. I think that those are the conversations we need to be looking at right now.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas, and thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Before we sign off, I'm going to take this rare occasion to exercise the chair's prerogative. Mr. Thibodeau, j'ai une question.
Mr. Thibodeau, I have a question for you. It's a very pertinent question here. In PI, you spoke about zones. These zones for determining the levels of benefits. This is a very important issue in Prince Edward Island. So my question for you, what's your understanding of the process to review these zones? Because the decision that was taken by the government in 2014 did create a situation in PI that encouraged dishonesty. So what's your proposal? In terms of these zones, I think in PI, you have two zones, I believe, in such a small island. I don't think that's quite reasonable. A single zone would have been better. Now, my understanding of these zones, when for us it was Tigouche Albert, close to Albert, that's right next to Moncton, an urban area. So if you look at the work economically, we are in the Acadian Peninsula where people have seasonal work in seasonal industries. So people have to drive 2 hours to get to Moncton or to where the zone ends. So even in Restigouche, they're 2 hours away. It's not reasonable. We're asking for a protected region where seasonal industry workers should be recognized. They should be given full value for the work they do. That's what I believe. I think the zone has to be completely revisited. It's not been done for several years. I think the zone has to be reviewed. And economically, the actions must really respond to the needs of seasonal workers.
Merci, Monsieur Thibodeau.
Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau,
for your testimony and the thorough manner in which you answered the questions. Also, thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties that we encountered. But be assured that what you had to say today was of great value to us in our work. To my colleagues, we do not have another meeting scheduled until the third week of July. So if that's the way this plays out, I wish you an excellent break from your headsets if you're able to arrange that. And to get outside. Thank you for all the courtesies that you have extended to me, to the witnesses, and to one another. And with that, my friends, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you.